And welcome to Straight Up with Mark Carney. I am your host. Well, a long-awaited pipeline announcement may finally be at hand. According to sources, Alberta and the Carney government are set to announce a new energy sector deal this coming Thursday. It'll come in the form of a memorandum of understanding that includes a reference to a new pipeline through northern BC to the coast. Now, just last week, we heard from a parade of Liberal Party climate hardliners throw cold water on the rumor that a deal was imminent, including an outright dismissal of any thought of lifting the ban on tanker traffic off the coast of BC. Ves Sobot is our guest today, and he'll be on hand shortly to talk about all of that. Well, no word on any resumption in trade talks between Canada and the United States, and the Prime Minister responded with a terse "who cares" when he was asked about it. Let's listen.
Who cares? I mean, it's a detail. It's a detail. I spoke to him. I'll speak to him again when it matters. I look forward to speaking to the President soon, but I don't have a burning issue to speak with the President about right now. When America wants to come back and have the discussions on the trade side, we will have those discussions.
Now, Conservative MP Melissa Lantsman responded to Carney's "who cares" in this way in this post. The Prime Minister has finally given up pretending he has any grip on Canada's relationship with the United States. And just as expected, he's now shrugging off the one promise he made about it, which also happens to be the one he's completely botched. Botched for auto workers, farmers, exporters, forestry towns, and every family in every border community that depends on trade. Well, one thing that the Prime Minister does care about is carbon emissions. Carney told the United Nations those energy-hungry AI centers being built need to be carbon neutral. Let's listen.
I want to highlight a few other issues before my time is up. First, the importance of high-integrity, standardized carbon markets that have the potential to shift capital flows to those most affected by climate change. We can catalyze enormous private sector demand for these credits by committing AI data center development to be carbon neutral. We need a price on carbon. I salute my neighbor, the European Union, in pricing carbon and putting in place a CBAM.
Well, others are giving up on carbon zero agendas, but not Carney. By 2030, it is estimated that AI, artificial intelligence, will drive 30 to 50% of all new electricity needs. Think about that. And with its natural gas deposits, Canada could play a big role in providing that energy needed to power those AI data centers. Well, the new poll by Leger found that more than 2/3 of new Canadians want fewer than 300,000 new immigrants brought into Canada every year. 40% of new Canadians want less than 100,000 newcomers brought into the country every year. And our guest today is Ves Sobot. He is an engineer. He spent 40 years working in the plastics industry. He's a business executive. He's also executive director of the Coalition for Concerned Manufacturers and Businesses of Canada. Welcome, Ves.
Great to be on. Thanks for having me.
We have-
Great set, by the way. I love your set.
Well, thank you. Yes. Let's talk a little bit about we'll get to J.D. Vance in a minute, but we've got to hit this oil news, this deal, alleged deal that has apparently been signed but not officially announced, and that's going to happen on Thursday, where there's going to be some kind of ceremony in which Mark Carney and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith are going to get together and sign this agreement that will apparently greenlight a pipeline. We've been waiting for this project for a long time through northern BC out to the coast, but it's just a story right now. What do you make of it?
Well, I know Danielle very well. Wonderful, wonderful premier. My goodness, she's serving Alberta well. And if anybody can do it, it would be Danielle Smith. Now, I always am very reserved when when I hear that there's a deal. We heard a couple of Thursdays ago that there was a deal with the Americans on the trade issue, and it sort of fell apart. Didn't happen. A lot of things can happen between now and Thursday, but I really hope that they do have a deal. That would be wonderful for Canada to be able to get our oil to the West Coast to be able to serve other markets would be absolutely tremendous. Now, um, of course, the devil is always in the details. What restrictions are there? If you recall, Mark, earlier on, EB said that he wasn't in favor of a deal. You recall Elizabeth May saying last week that there's no way there's going to be more tanker traffic on the West Coast. So there's a lot of opposition to this, but I think if it comes to fruition, it will be wonderful for Canada. It'll be extra revenue. It'll be extra taxes. It'll be something that can go towards, social programs, and it'll help ratchet down the temperature right now because the talk of Western separation is very, very high right now. I think you probably saw some of the crowds that were in Edmonton and Calgary over the weekend. They were very large. And there is a real sentiment that Alberta wants to go it alone. Now, whether they have a majority of people thinking so, I don't know, but it's always a concern.
Yeah, I mean, I take your point about what kind of measures that she will have had to agree to, like decarbonizing and all this sort of thing. How onerous will those be? I mean, if she agrees to it, then presumably they're doable. But if you're raising the cost of production, then you could almost sabotage the project by imposing so many restrictions that it's just not economically feasible.
What a great point. What a great point. And you use the word decarbonization. Mark, I just hate that word. I can't stand it because it's fictitious. How do you decarbonize oil? You cannot. It is a word that comes out of George Orwell's 1984 book. You cannot decarbonize. Oil is carbon, for goodness sake. So these semantics really scare me. I'm just reading through Mark Carney's book, Values, and there's so much on sustainability there. It reminds me of two meetings I sat in at a luncheon at the Bank of Canada many years ago with Mark Carney and a number of other people. And all he did was talk about sustainability. And I thought to myself, I must be at the wrong meeting. We're here to talk about the Canadian economy and interest rates. Why are we talking about sustainability? And all of us got up, maybe there's 12 of us at the time, got up, left that luncheon, and thought, what did we just see? That's what scares me. So I'm very hopeful that Danielle was able to somehow navigate those very treacherous waters. But judging by the book and his past performance, I'm not sure that this is a deal that will be beneficial for Alberta in the long run.
And what about the tanker traffic ban? I mean, do you lift that? Do you partially lift it? I think the Globe and Mail reported last week that there would be a limited lifting of the tanker ban as it now exists, which would allow for traffic. I mean, it's still going on. The American ships are going through that same area. I mean, Elizabeth May says, well, it's not exactly the same area because this, that, and the other thing. But I mean, I'd like to do something with the tanker ban. Then there's no point building a pipeline, right? Because you got to ship it. You got to move it, right?
100%. And, there's a tanker going up to Alaska from Washington every day and a tanker coming back from Alaska every day. One is full and one is empty. But the fact that the Americans have easy access to the West Coast and can ship their product back to their markets is exactly what Canada should have as well. I mean, I don't understand why we are so desperate to handcuff our own economic growth. That still to this day does not make any sense to me. Canada should be the richest country in the world. We've talked about that in the past on your radio show. And we should be richer than the Kuwaitis, than the folks in the UAE. We should be at par with Saudi Arabia, for goodness sakes. And yet we're not, because we handcuff ourselves. We handcuff our ability to bring product to market. And it'll be interesting to see if this deal has an exemption to that. That's really, I think, what has to happen. Remember, too, Bill C-69 is a horrendous bill that essentially stops Canadian production and development of our own resources. He's going to have many of his exemptions revolving around Bill C-69 as well, wouldn't you think?
Well, yeah. I mean, logically speaking, the No More Pipelines bill will have to be changed or scrapped or whatever in order for that project to move forward. But it'll be very interesting to see what happens on Thursday when we get a first glimpse at this, because, of course, Carney himself is kind of navigating, the two sides of his party. There are still some people there who believe that a pipeline would be a good thing. I suspect they're the quiet ones, very quiet ones, keeping to themselves, keeping their heads down. And then you've got the much louder, hardliners on the climate front, the Nathaniel Erskine Smiths of the world and the Stephen Gilbos, who say, no way, Jose, we're not going to build this thing. And they want to throw as many impediments, towards the building of it as possible. Well, you've got to come up with a deal with the Indigenous people. You've got to make it palatable to them. You've got to have BC on side. Well, we all know BC is not going to be on side. So, I mean, there's all sorts of questions around this thing because, what about David Eby? He just came out last week and was fervent in his opposition to that pipeline, saying, well, if you do that, it'll mess up my deal with the Indigenous peoples and their project that we have in the works, which is contingent on keeping the tanker banned. So, I mean, this was only last week, and Eby has not been privy to some of the talks that have been going on. In fact, he was complaining about it last week, saying, I know there's talks going on between Premiers Moe and Danielle Smith and the Carney government, and I'm not part of it. And so, Thursday's going to be an interesting day if it works out that there is an announcement. What do you think?
Well, you mentioned Stephen Gilboa, and I was fascinated to hear that he had gone down to Brazil for those UN environmental talks recently, even though that's not in his portfolio. And he went down on the government dime for that. That struck me as awfully odd, I think. And of course, Stephen Guilbeault is the minister who said he doesn't want any more new highways across Canada, right? And of course, he doesn't want, oil exports from Canada. If you recall his lineage, he came from Greenpeace. He he hung from the CN Tower many years ago and literally cost about $500,000 because he got stranded hanging from a rope trying to hang a Greenpeace banner. And the police had to come in, the helicopters had to come in, they had to rescue him. And that's how he was charged, and he had a criminal record as a result of it. And still, he managed to become a minister in the Trudeau government. Certainly, he's no fan of Canada developing its own resources. So the question becomes, why was he down there? Is he down there to brief the prime minister? Was he down there to share the latest with Eby? I don't know, but I think that's a wild card, and it will not be helpful. Remember, the United Nations years ago, because of Morris Strong, the Undersecretary General of the United Nations, started this whole environmental UNEP movement as a means to make up for the money that was lost when the Americans decided they weren't going to fund the United Nations temporarily for a short period of time. So it was Morris Strong who came up with this whole notion of carbon trading, and it was supposed to be a means of funding the United Nations in the event that the U.S. no longer funded the UN. And it has nothing truly to do with the environment. It had everything to do with a financial arrangement with the UN. So I find it hard to believe that it's going to be a deal that makes business sense, but I do have a lot of respect for Premier Smith, and if anybody can do this, I think Danielle can.
And once we see that deal, then we'll see whether or not that dampens some of the talk about, independence out there, which you talked about earlier.
Right.
But if they see that this deal is, you look at the devil's in the details, and they see that, no, this is going to push, it's not going to be workable, it's not going to be economically feasible, then it may push things the other direction and say they're trying to screw us over, and our own premier is in league with them. I mean, that could happen. So that's why it's so important that we see this deal when it eventually is announced on Thursday. I know I'll be keeping a close eye on that. We also got to talk a little bit about AI, because that, of course, is powered by electricity. And it's an enormous, enormously needing. These data centers require all sorts of power. I mean, Canada is well positioned to provide that power. Unfortunately, because of our regulations, because of the anti-oil and anti-energy, really, opponents in our country, we haven't really positioned ourselves very well, whereas the Americans have. And, they're exploding in terms of the amount of investment going into these AI centers. And, they say that by 2030, it's going to demand between 30 and 50% of all new energy is going to have to go to power these AI data centers. I mean, here's Canada perfectly positioned here to provide energy, to power these things. And then you've got Carney saying, well, no, it's got to be decarbonized. AI has to be sort of carbon friendly or carbon neutral. I mean,
Well,
here he's blowing it, with an
wouldn't it
opportunity like.
would, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had AI centers in Canada? But of course we can't if we have a carbon tax, and if we're rationing electricity all over the place. We have so much natural gas that can create electricity. Again, wouldn't it be wonderful if those barriers for natural gas plants would be removed so that we could take advantage of and build some of those AI plants? I know Microsoft years ago looked at North Bay as a center for their computing capabilities, because there are some old bunkers up there that were empty during the Second World War. And at the time, Mayor Vic Fideli of North Bay walked Bill Gates and Microsoft through those operations. They never decided to take them up on the offer, but that's the kind of thing I think that would help growth in Canada. Um, we have so much natural gas. I think it's the third. We're the third largest natural gas reserves in the world. It would be wonderful for us to be able to supply some of that electricity through natural gas generation. And yet, the city of Toronto right now is trying to minimize natural gas in new subdivisions. Oh, you can't use those. You have to use electricity, which is generated how? It our strategy seems to be very dysfunctional, and I am hopeful. I'm very, very hopeful that we start becoming more pragmatic. Most people don't know this, but 5 to 10% of all electricity use is just used in pushing water from the source to the tap in a city. That's electricity. You need electricity to push that water to a tap. That's the same when we talk about AI. AI needs enormous amount of electricity to drive those engines. And one of the reasons Ontario was so wealthy so quickly at the turn of the century, you'll recall, is the wonderful hydroelectric generating stations down in Niagara Falls that Nikola Tesla and George Westinghouse had built. That gave us a superior advantage for the first half of the 20th century. And that's the kind of visionary thinking we need. That's the kind of, we need technology that'll help us generate wealth. And so far, I'm not seeing that with Carney. Carney keeps talking sustainability. He keeps talking about carbon neutral. He keeps talking about net zero. Well, Mark, I can assure you, the only thing that's going to be net zero in 2050 is my wallet and your wallet.
The other thing is, of course, he gets asked periodically about trade talks, and he just kind of just dribbled out of his mouth. Who cares? Somebody asked him if he had had any contact with Trump, or if Trump was calling him back, or they had any furtherance in moving, on discussions around trade. And he said, who cares? I mean, what do you make of that? To me, it shows that he's getting annoyed. He doesn't want to be asked about that. He doesn't want to be reminded about his failure to live up to his key promise, which was, a victorious deal with Trump by July 21st. He doesn't want to be reminded of that. What do you think?
Well, it's very odd. I mean, they are our biggest customer. Like, we need to treat the Americans with respect. For 40 years, I've been going to the United States and dealing with businessmen in the U.S. I can tell you the relationship with the American people and the American businessmen with Canadians has always been very respectful. I've just loved the American customer. I've loved the American um, um, gumption. I've loved the American entrepreneurship. Um, he should be nurturing that and trying to make that better. Okay, we do 75% of our exports to the United States right now. Great. Let's make it 80. Let's not talk about trying to change and shift our exports to Europe because they will not buy our stuff. They're too far away. They already have their logistical supply chains in place. The most logical customer for us is America. Let's make it bigger, stronger, better. And take a look at the president of Mexico. She's been doing that. In fact, Mark, we used to be the biggest supplier to America. Now we're the second biggest. Why? Because Mexico has taken over. They've taken our spot because they were focused on the ball. They were focused on business, and they've been very, very effective at displacing us. We need to focus all our energies on displacing them so that we become America's number one customer yet again. And you don't become America's biggest customer by insulting the president of the United States.
Yeah, Mexico has become the number one buyer of U.S. goods. We used to be number one.
Yeah.
And so that undermines our case, with the Americans, which is to say, hey, you need us too. We're inseparable. We're, economically dependent on each other, and so the fact that we now buy less than Mexico, I think hurts our case. Anyway, last word to you.
Well, you had mentioned J.D. Vance and his comments that really we shouldn't be blaming the Americans for our problems. I wholeheartedly agree. We should be focused on making Canada better. We are so fortunate to be their neighbors. And what we need to do is continue to see if we can make 1 + 1 = 3 with our American neighbors, find out what they need, find out how geopolitically we can help them, find and make ourselves in an ally that they cannot live without.
Yeah.
That's the direction we need to go. And I don't think Carney is there yet. I think it's on purpose. I don't think he wants a trade deal quite yet. And for that, I don't understand why, but that says to me that he needs to refocus. He needs to work for the Canadian people, not for his friends in the UK and the EU and the WEF.
And Brookfield.
And Brookfield.
That's so about. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Great to have you on here.
Great to be on. Thank you so much.
And that is it for this edition of Straight Up. Appreciate you tuning in, my friends. Let's do it again soon, shall we? Bye-bye for now.